you know what the Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom and Pokemon Scarlet Violet have in common? They're both behemoth Nintendo Switch titles that somehow managed to leak 2 weeks early. No spoilers in this video, Zelda fans, don't worry. But do you know what they don't have in common? One of these titles is highly anticipated, gonna have nothing but positive reviews and praise come out for it, gonna be timeless amongst the fans and newcomers alike, it's gonna be super replayable and beloved by the community. While the other was met with mixed anticipation, had pretty mediocre reviews, had mixed reviews while most of the fans of the series loved it, but still some didn't like it, isn't necessarily timeless since people are already burned out from the game a few months in, definitely isn't super replayable, and like most games in the franchise after the halfway point, isn't really beloved by the majority of the community. Yeah, I would ask you to guess which is which, but I know the footage ruined the answers to the guess of the century here. But yeah, Pokemon fans hate Pokemon, while Zelda fans love Zelda. But why is that? Well, to go over this, we're gonna have to take a deep dive into the history of both franchises, and then take a look at their current titles, and compare that way. Let's start off with Zelda since Tears of the Kingdom is so fresh and new. The Legend of Zelda is a series that from its very first game in the series has broken certain status quos of the system it's on, pushed it to its limits and far surpassed expectations. The first title in the series, the NES one, came out in 1986. The amount of hidden items and secrets in the NES title was far beyond the scope of what fans of the NES ever deemed possible, and thus playing through the game to discover all these secrets became very rewarding and fun, since there's a certain level of difficulty and replayability to the game. To move on to the SNES, A Link to the Past, which came out in 1991, it offered a massive upgrade to the series with more story elements in play, new mechanics that changed the way combat works. You can move beyond a grid, the world is expanded not only in terms of the size of the map, but locations have much more depth with caves and falling into underground pits. Then comes Ocarina of Time in 1998, who took 2D and made it 3D, allowing for a whole new kind of adventure, completely changing the combat system, making dungeon puzzles more challenging and interesting than ever, all kinds of new characters and enemies introduced to the world, being able to traverse the world like never before, and my god, was it a humongous world for the time, and still is easy to get lost in this day. And of course, the story and lore reached all new heights, with it being so good that it's considered to be one of the best games of all time to this day. Flash forward to the modern day era, and we have Zelda in a completely new form with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Zelda for the first time ever went completely open world with Breath of the Wild in 2017, being speculated to be the fabled Zelda U title, as we were eagerly anticipating a new Zelda game for the Wii U, since all we got for the system were ports like Wind Waker HD. No brand new title. However, Zelda U kept getting delayed and delayed because the Zelda team was hard at work at trying to get a masterpiece in place, and also probably because of the sales of the Wii U really sucked. But by the time it was ready, they had created Breath of the Wild, the final game for the Wii U, and one of the first games created that was ready for the release of the Nintendo Switch. A game that literally redefined the Zelda experience, not just by making it a completely open world, letting you experience Hyrule the way you wanted to, but also by completely revolutionizing the combat and weapon system with weapons that break, having cooking, being able to legitimately defeat the game within like an hour, or choosing to take hours and hours to beat it and still not get bored of it. Dungeons, a staple from the Zelda franchise, was completely replaced with smaller shrines scattered across the map, and all of the new powers and abilities were given to you, physics and mechanics unlike any other, making it so that the game's world feels so real and alive, allowing players to use them in ways that weren't intended to, allowing for massive creativity, ultimately allowing this to be a revolutionary title not just in the history of Zelda, but a revolutionary title within gaming itself, as not only did Breath of the Wild end up winning Game of the Year, but it also ended up being so good that games like Genshin Impact, Sonic Frontiers, and even Pokemon's Legends Arceus tried to mimic and learn off of what Zelda did right and incorporate it into their own titles. And mind you, this was Zelda's first brand new console release since 2011 with Skyward Sword. Now let's move on to Pokemon. Pokemon Red and Blue came out in 1996, and just like The Legend of Zelda for the NES, Red and Blue literally redefined the possibilities of what people thought could be contained within a Game Boy game. There were 151 Pokemon for you to catch and use, a massive world for the handheld at the time, a plethora of combinations and strategies with all different Pokemon moves that you could use, and game-breaking glitches and exploits that weren't intended to be a part of the games, but ones that did make the gossip and playground secrets of these games go crazy, causing people to be interested in it, and thus leading to more success and sales. Don't get it twisted, Gen 1, no matter what you may say about it now, during the time of the Game Boy era, was the game to have because it went above and beyond all kinds of expectations. And this is because the team at the time poured their heart and souls into this game, no pun intended, to make it something truly groundbreaking and put all their passion into it. Gen 2 Pokemon Gold and Silver came out in 1999, and this game had similar things to Gen 1, except now it's colored, and there were 100 extra Pokemon for you to catch. Not so much groundbreaking exploits or anything, but it once again did go beyond the limits of what people thought could happen in a Game Boy Color game, as Iwata was so dedicated and passionate towards these games that he found a way to get all of Kanto in these games as well when it was going to be finished without it, making Gen 2 and its remakes to this day the only Pokemon game to have 2 regions and 16 gym leaders, something unheard of otherwise in the Pokemon franchise, and something that was absolutely crazy for the Game Boy Color. To have a handheld game with this much possible playtime and this big of a world was nuts. Then come Gen 3 and 4, and while Ruby and Sapphire in 2002 weren't anything too crazy, they did introduce some more Pokemon and the additions of double battles, but the thing that was probably the most crazy was probably Emerald in 2004 with the Rayquaza cutscene that kind of blew people away at that time. And then yeah, the Battle Frontier of course giving it replay value, but of course this is when Pokemon started to milk the remake cow by pulling on some nostalgia with Fire Red and Leaf Green, which also came out earlier in 2004, but more or less besides a few changes, these games are the same Pokemon games, and you got like 3 different iterations this quick. Gen 4 comes out and these games are visually stunning and are some of the most beloved games because of how the game now has internet functionality. There's much more interactions possible with wireless communications and all. Story and lore-wise, Diamond and Pearl really give us a good jump in 2006, but Platinum pushed it further in 2008. That along with the new Pokemon selection and the new battle facilities made Platinum very beloved to this day, even though Diamond and Pearl is considerably tougher, but besides that and some additional Pokemon, that's about it. Heart Gold and Soul Silver came out in 2009, and this to many people was peak Pokemon, because this game has the most amount of content from any Pokemon game ever, and we're almost like 15 years away from this game. It has 2 regions and the 16 gym leaders, and on top of that, it has Platinum's battle facilities, the best mystery gift events in all of Pokemon, charming visuals, and something so touching and warm like following Pokemon, and that level of content is what makes it so enjoyable for fans. Because for the first time in a long time since Generation 2, it really felt like they went above and beyond. But tell me something, what did Gen 1 and 2 do that Gen 3 and 4 didn't? What did Zelda do that every other generation of Pokemon moving forward doesn't do? Pokemon only for the first 2 generations decided to push the system and the game to its limits, and was truly passionate about the titles they were working on. Every other generation doesn't have this. While Zelda takes years and years to come out with a brand new title for their consoles, revamps the games and tells a whole new story, changes gameplay mechanics, loads the game with new lore and secrets in a different way every time, making the game of a whole new caliber, Pokemon is the same game as it has been since Generation 1. Gen 2 gets a pass because the content-wise it was pushed to a crazy limit, which is respectable, but what about the other generations? I don't feel it. It feels just as big as the previous worlds. The limits feel as the same as it did in Gen 1, maybe Gen 2. And the worst part is, Pokemon has this really stupid trend going on. Gen 5 excels in story, while gameplay is more or less the same. Gen 6 tries to switch up the gameplay with Mega Evolution, but has the most lackluster story, period. Gen 7 keeps a similar gameplay mechanic to Gen 6 and has a great story. Gen 8 tries to change the gameplay with the overall Pokemon and stuff, but lacks story. Do you see the trend? Pokemon games don't learn from the previous title. If there's something good about a generation, it's left there rather than taken and being expanded upon for a future release. Or if we didn't have releases so often, maybe all these aspects and improvements of a game could be focused at once and given in one title, rather than 2 or 3 separate titles. Pokemon stopped going beyond its limits. It did the bare minimum and lost all of its passion. After Gen 2, it's become more like marketing and business than it has been a passion project. And hey, before you go and fault Game Freak here, hear me out till the end of the video because it's not actually their fault. Some of you might be saying that, well, Breath of the Wild didn't have much of a story, but you're not saying bad things about that. And that's because, well, Breath of the Wild had 5 years of development to feel like a totally new game unlike any other Zelda experience, and yes, it pushed the Wii U and the Switch to its seeming limits, as people still don't understand how these consoles can handle these games. Let's Go and Sword and Shield felt abysmal. It literally felt like these games could have been on handheld consoles prior to the Switch, and you know what? Truth be told, it could have because they did nothing to go beyond the scope of what the franchise has already been. Whereas Zelda always strives to go beyond their limits and has so much passion poured into the games. Zelda's not out there trying to get their money and recognition just like that. Zelda has passion and love, and an interest to do as best as they can in every possible title that they create, and in return, they receive a lot of praise and money for their genuine efforts. Pokemon used to have that in its Red and Blue days, and its efforts were met. Satoshi Tajiri, the guy who made Pokemon, would literally work for 24 hours straight and sleep for 12 hours and repeat this cycle upon other crazy things to make these games come out. But now, Pokemon, what was once a passion project, has literally become a constant marketing tactic for the anime, TCG, and sales of the company. It's pure advertisement for the franchise at hand. It's no longer just a video game served to be appreciated by the fans. It's straight up a marketing ploy, sucking out all the passion and love out of it because they have to get a new game out pretty much every year. Don't get me wrong, I've never seen Zelda dish out so many remakes from the time of Skyward Sword to Breath of the Wild. They need to get their money up too. But those games are kind of filling the void until something much bigger comes out. With Pokemon, they take small incremental steps with every game that they have, but never accumulate it into one masterpiece of a title. They just leave it back in the generation where it was because they don't need to go past any kind of barriers. They literally have the money in the bag, and the sales show, so why would they ever do anything differently? Now, I did say earlier not to get mad at Game Freak for this, and it's true, there's a huge fundamental difference with Zelda and Pokemon. While Zelda is owned by Aonuma and published by Nintendo, Pokemon is split three ways between Game Freak, Creatures Inc., and Nintendo. So, Game Freak's not only at Nintendo's mercy for getting games out, but also at Creatures Inc. to get the advertisements going, because if you didn't know, Pokemon is the biggest grossing media franchise in the world, and most of its sales don't come from the games, it comes from its products. The TCG, the plushies, the merch, which Creatures Inc. is partially responsible for, making the games, as I said earlier, a walking advertisement rather than a passion project like Zelda. However, with the recent additions of Pokemon Legends Arceus and Pokemon Scarlet Violet, there is hope. Fans have been complaining about Pokemon being the same games over and over again, and it's safe to say that Game Freak has heard it and had enough power to change things. Both Pokemon Legends Arceus and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, for the first time, I'd say since Generation 1, brought new life into this franchise. Both games went beyond what was seen to be a traditional Pokemon game, redefining the Pokemon experience in their own ways. Legends Arceus, while it can be argued that it's not a mainline Pokemon game, redefined the whole battle system, gave us a fully focused story title, while actually giving us reason to capture all the Pokemon in a fun and unique way, while giving us all kinds of lore to the series as well. And Scarlet and Violet, in my opinion, is the first time since Generation 1 where it felt like a new start of a Pokemon generation or a new mainline Pokemon game felt innovated. Felt reminiscent of that of Gen 1 in the way that it redefined things for the franchise. Maybe it hasn't pushed the Nintendo Switch to its limits like how Tears of the Kingdom has. Tears of the Kingdom has already been told to make Breath of the Wild feel like a prototype game in comparison, which is saying a lot because prior to this, Breath of the Wild was the game that seemed like it pushed the Switch to its limits. But Game Freak and Pokemon have clearly heard the fans' cries and are putting way more passion into their games and are trying something really different with Legends Arceus and Scarlet and Violet. And while I'm sure Tears of the Kingdom is going to receive 10 out of 10s across the board, and while Scarlet and Violet received what I think is the lowest rating for any main Pokemon game due to all the bugs and glitches, I still have faith in Pokemon moving forward, because they really seem to be trying this time around. And a lot of it is because they have Zelda to thank, because it's clear from the open world and the ambience of Legends Arceus, Pokemon is taking a lot of inspiration from Zelda and Breath of the Wild, and I'm sure with Tears of the Kingdom, it's going to be no different. And if that's the case, then I'm sure that the future of Pokemon will be looking bright as well.